Hey, good morning. I'm here in Sasebo. We're going to be doing our presentation on church history today. As you can see, I'm sharing the slideshow. I can also drop this to anyone or email it. I'm going to try to put it in my spiritual feeding group chat as well, so you guys can kind of reference this. Some of the resources I used is by George Knight, search for identity, brief search for identity history. Light Bearers to the Remnant, and George Knight has a series of Ellen White books that include meeting Ellen White, interpreting Ellen White, her personal life, and how to apply Ellen White. I'm looking for my Kindle app so I can get you the exact name of the Ellen White books. So yeah, the series is George Knight, Ellen White. If you go on Amazon, you can buy it. I think I bought all four books for under $40 roughly. But he basically goes into talking about how to apply Ellen White to our lives today, along with his other book, which is a brief search for identity. He goes into Seventh Day Adventist history and Light Bearers to the Remnant, which I don't know. Yeah, Light Bearers to the Remnant. There's two editions. I have the most current edition, which was still printed in, well, it was copyrighted in 1979. Now, as you might be able to see, I'm wearing the Andrews University shirt. So I just did a class through Andrews on Adventist history, which is what I am basing this PowerPoint and this presentation off of. Today, though, I'm not going to go over the entire history, right? It's too much to try to do in one setting. Today, we're going to get up to 1863, a significant point in our church history, and you'll see why. But some of the other topics that we're going to go over is the GC meeting, General Conference meeting of 1888. It's one of the pivotal meetings that we have in our existence. So I urge you to research out 1888 and what it was about. And then we're also going to go over some stuff that we find in the book, Last Generation Theology. We're going to go over the shut door theory. We're going to go over how we became as big as we are, right, with the GC and the union conferences and the evangelistic conferences, and how do we get to where we are now. There's some within the church that believe we are too structured, right? We have the GC, and then you have the conference of that area, then you have little units, and then churches underneath that. And some believe we're making it too complicated, and I agree with that. But the idea for today, without getting off too much of a sidetrack, is going into the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Where do we get our roots? What are we rooted in? Before we start and continue on, let's open up with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this chance. We thank you for this chance and for the technology that we have, that we can learn more about your church, Lord, that we can learn more about where do we come from. It's important for every one of us to know the history that we have. Lord, open our hearts, our minds, our ears, and guide us as we continue on with this lesson. Let your words be heard. Let your message be heard. And I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So I firmly believe every Seventh-day Adventist should know the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I visited different churches in California, and Virginia and here in Japan. And it seems like not too many people know our history. They know of Ellen White and they know of William Miller, but do they really know how everything got started? And the simple answer is no. They don't. I don't want to say they don't want to know, but no one's ever brought it up or taught them. So, and a lot of Adventists that I've met, I can't say for around the world, but there are a lot of Adventists that I've met are Seventh-day Adventists because it's a family tradition. It's what's easy for them. It was the first church that they founded, or whatever. Um, and they don't necessarily have a good understanding or view of the doctrines that we have, or why we believe what we believe, or even how we got founded. There's some out there who still believe that William Miller gave the exact date of October 22nd, 1844. And we'll see in this presentation, it wasn't William Miller who gave that exact date, although he did give a span of time. We'll get into that before. So I won't discuss that anymore until we get to that slide. So like I said, I have this PowerPoint presentation, the slideshow. If you want a copy of it, please let me know. I'll also drop it in the spiritual feeding group chat that I have on Facebook. So the history of the Seventh-day Adventist. Where do we get our roots? The first Great Awakening, right? The first time that the Bible came into real play was between 1730 and 1740. People picked up the Bible and they started to have a reformation, right? They started to apply it, they started to study it out, and they started to see that God's word could play a pivotal part in our world. A spiritual revival in Europe, the United Kingdom, and in the United States. So you can see this revival covered a lot of territory back in these years. The Second Great Awakening is a little bit longer, 1790 to 1840, right? This, in the Second Great Awakening, is where Adventism starts its roots. It's where we start to dig in a little bit. It's where we are first known as the Millerite movement, William Miller, right? Who is William Miller? William Miller lived between the years of 1782 and 1849. He was the oldest of 16 children, and he grew up in a Baptist home. At the age of 4, his family moved to New York, right? At the age of 21, he married Lucy Smith. Now, keep in mind, he has a Baptist background, right? That's why he is known as the Baptist pastor who started this movement. William Miller believed in deism. What is deism, you might ask? I think I covered a little bit more, but the gist of deism is God created everything, and then he's hands off. He doesn't want nothing to do with it. He created it. He wants to see how it plays out, right? Now, William Miller was drafted during the War of 1812. He was a captain in the army, and during one of his battles, he was outnumbered, right? I think the book states he was outnumbered like 1 to 50. He thought during this battle that he was surely going to die. But miraculously, and through the grace of God, him and his troops were able to survive. So this made William Miller question his belief in deism, right? When William Miller returned from the war, he would oftentimes give sermons at his church. One Sunday, when he was given the message, he realized it was a message on Christian lifestyle and how Christians should be. He realized that he was not living the godly lifestyle that God wants us to live. So this led him to an in-depth Bible study. So from the year 1816 to 1818, he did just that. He devoted his life to studying just the Bible. That's 2 years of constant studying. It's 2 years. It's not just like what we do with our daily devotions, right? I mean, this is, If he's not working in the field, he's in his Bible, right? He has his, if you've seen the movie Tell It to the World, it goes into great depth about how he was studying, how he came to the 2300-day prophecy, right? And the conclusion that he got from this in-depth study is that the world would end in 25 years, as told by the book of Daniel, right? But more specifically, Daniel 8, verse 14 is a verse that Seventh-day Adventists pretty much have memorized. Unto 2300 days will the sanctuary be cleansed, right? He would again, right? Again, he would study the Bible from 1818 to 1823. So you notice William Miller's life, right? Whenever he realized he wasn't living a godly lifestyle, he wasn't living the way that God had called us to live. What did he do? He picked up his Bible and he read it. Not only did he read it, not only did he give it like a 30, 40-minute devotional, he studied it. He gave time to it. He wanted to have an in-depth relationship with God. He wanted to understand. He wanted to get the nuts and bolts of it all together. And in 1831, William Miller made a covenant with God. He would preach the message that he has been studying out in Daniel 8:14. But he would only preach it if he was invited to preach it. And that is exactly what God did. He invited William Miller to share his studies. In 1839, William is invited. Okay, so I didn't add this in, but let me backtrack. While he was making this covenant with God about sharing his message, he and his wife are having dinner. And as they're having dinner, there was a knock on the door. That knock was William's nephew. He was on horseback, and he came and said that the pastor couldn't give the message that following Sunday. Would he be willing to do it? And if you've seen the movie, or if you haven't, there's a scene that plays out where he gets up from the table and runs out to the field, and he starts yelling and basically screaming and asking God why I'm not ready. But then he remembers his covenant that he made with God and agrees to give the message on the 2300, on the prophecy that he's been studying at. And when he gave this message, it was well received, right? But people were still trying to figure out what he was saying. And then in 1839, he is invited to the Chardon Street Chapel in Boston, right? Here he meets Joshua Himes. Now, Joshua Himes would become Miller's campaign manager, right? He would be the mouthpiece getting William Miller all these venues to speak in. 3 months after Miller visited Himes' church, Himes started the Signs of the Time, right? The little magazine. And then in 1842, Himes published The Midnight Cry. And this would lead them into their first camp meeting. Their first camp meeting was a giant tent, right? And it had enough room to fit 4,000 people in that tent. Imagine camp meetings today, right? I haven't been to one yet, but I see them on the old Amazing Facts and 3ABN and all of that. But it's where preachers go from our faith, and they preach messages and they teach people. So this first camp meeting they had was 4,000 people. 4,000 people seems like a lot, but when you think about the number of people back in the 1840s, it's not really that big, just like 4,000 isn't a lot today. But it's 4,000 people that heard the message of Christ's soon second coming. Now they can take that message, 4,000 people can take that message, and they can take it and spread that to their friends, which is what we are called to do today as well. So out of that 4,000 people, the message could spread even more, vice if only William Miller was the one preaching it. So the camp meeting paid off with what they wanted it to do, right? Now, Charles Fitch, he was a Millerite preacher, right? In the summer of 1843, he was preaching a sermon called Babylon is Fallen, right? The sermon topic was based on the second angel's message, where he equated Babylon to the Roman Catholic Church. In 1843, he equated it also to everyone who denied the soon coming of Christ, right? They would be considered Babylon. Now, it isn't the hate for the people inside the Catholic Church, right? Adventists, sometimes we forget this. It isn't the people inside the church, it's the political and powerful structure that the Roman Catholic Church has become. There's Christians and God-fearing people inside the Catholic Church, inside every church, right? But what they equated Babylon to here was the entity of the little horn, right? And everyone who would deny Christ, because if you deny Christ, that means you're living in Babylon, as Revelation speaks of. We'll get into that a little bit later. Now I want to talk about the 7-month movement, right? The Exeter, New Hampshire, the camp meeting, right, of 1844, Joseph Bates is preaching. Now, a horseback rider by the name of Samuel Shepherdfield Snow, also known as SS Snow, he arrives at the camp meeting and he tells his sister that he has new light for Christ's second coming. It would be Sheffield that sets the exact date of October 22nd, 1844. Now, some of you might be asking, well, what date did William Miller set then? Because we've always learned William Miller, October 22nd, 1844. William Miller actually set the time period of March 22nd, 1843 to March 22nd, 1844, right? But with the new light given, when March 22nd, 1844 passed and Christ hasn't come, William Miller remembered what SS Snow has said, and then he equated the 2300 day prophecy to October 22nd, 1844. So it wasn't William Miller who originally set the date as October 22nd, 1844. It was Samuel Sheffield Snow who did so, a horseback rider. By October of 1844, right, the Millerites were ready for Christ. By October 16th, Joshua Himes, he has stopped printing the Adventist Herald, right? And people resigned from their jobs. They repaid their debts, and they had continuous camp meetings. They were ready to truly meet Jesus, right? They had no responsibilities in the world left. They paid off everything that they had owed, and they were studying the scriptures together in these camp meetings, awaiting for Christ's second coming, October 22nd, 1844. This leads us to the Great Disappointment. At the time of the Great Disappointment, there was 50,000 to 100,000 believers awaiting Christ, and he never came. He never came. And this is what some people hinge on today, because we've been preaching the second coming of Christ for over 150 years now. People are like, well, is he ever going to come? But again, another topic for a whole nother time. Notice the next point, right? This would cause most to give up Christianity, right? They had said that they had put everything they had into Christ's second coming, and they were disappointed. Most left the church, right? But those who didn't leave the church would be broken up into 3 groups. The Albany, which is the people who believe the event is correct, but we just had the wrong date. So they kept on trying to put future dates, which never came to pass. The second group, spiritualizers, right? who believe that the event is correct plus the date is correct, but it happened spiritually, right? So they believe the second coming happened, but it was all in spirit. And then the third group, which would be known later as the Seventh Day Adventist, right? We believe that the event was wrong, but the date was correct, which leads us into our original doctrines, right? I like to call them the 5 pillars. The first one is the sanctuary. It was introduced by Hiram Edson in 1844 after the Great Disappointment. Right after the Great Disappointment, the Millerites were ashamed to show their faces out in public. So when they would travel through cornfields and back roads so they wouldn't be necessarily seen by that many people of the public. While walking through a cornfield one day, he stopped and explained that he saw that Jesus entered the second place of the sanctuary, and he was given this in vision, which this would make sense, and it would introduce our investigative judgment and put Jesus at the center of the sanctuary message, which is what we still do today. An in-depth study of the sanctuary in 1845, they published an article with the findings of his research, right? His research showed that there's a literal sanctuary in heaven. You can see that in the book of Hebrews, chapter 8, right? He also showed that God showed Moses the sanctuary, Exodus 25, 8-9. There's 2 phases, right? The first phase is the daily, the second phase, blotting out of the sins on the scapegoat, right? Cleansing of the sanctuary, right? Cleanse with blood, not fire. Jesus would enter the holy place, which leads us into our investigative judgment. Christ returns when he's done blotting out the sins of us. In 1840, Litch pointed to the investigative judgment. And in 1847, Joseph Bates, equates the Day of Atonement with the pre-Advent judgment, also known as investigative judgment. Now, I know this doesn't go too in-depth with it, and I'm going to do a later study on each of our 5 original pillars, but this is the gist of it. This is still what we believed up until 1980. You might ask yourself what happened in 1980. I'm not going to get into that yet. You'll probably Google it. But there was in the 1980s, there was giant pushback on the Adventist church, and it caused us to re-study out Daniel and Revelation, right? Which at the center of that is the sanctuary message. So I'm going to get into that later on, but this is the gist of what we believed in the sanctuary up to this time. And we could prove it all biblically. So that's why we say as one of the key fundamental pillars of our faith. Second one, second coming. Introduced by William Miller, right? So after years of studying the Bible, he began to preach this message in 1831, and he would proclaim the Lord's return between 1843 and 1844. Based on this belief and his study of Daniel 8, 13, and 14, then I heard one saint speaking to another saint, said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both to the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Again, not too in depth. I plan on doing a video per 5 original doctrines, but the second coming of Christ is key pivotal for our faith. It's what we are rooted in, right? Some people want to claim that William Miller was wrong, so we shouldn't include him in our history. But without William Miller, there is no Adventism at this time, right? There's no people leading into it because he's the one who introduced Christ's second coming to the world. He's the one who took the message and preached it. So William Miller deserves a spot right there in our history, just as any of the other founding fathers have. Which leads us into our third pillar, right? Spirit of prophecy. Now, when you say spirit of prophecy, most people automatically think of Ellen White, right? And the slide I have broken down is for Ellen White. But remember, the spirit of prophecy is Jesus, right? Revelation 12:17 mixed in compiled with 19:10 shows us that the testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of prophecy. So why do I tie it to Ellen White? Ellen White's Conflict of the Ages series, most people known as the spirit of prophecy, right? Ellen White is key, pivotal in our church, right? Her first vision came in December of 1844. She was 17 years old. And the vision came while she was at the family altar. The vision came while she was worshiping, right? She would be shown in her first vision, she was shown that the path to heaven had two major points. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus and don't deny the midnight cry. Don't deny William Miller's message, right? So, yes, spirit prophecy is Jesus Christ. Spirit prophecy, Ellen White points us in all of her writings, right, that she wrote, not the compilations, even though the compilations do too, but don't get the two confused. Ellen White, in all of her writings that she wrote and of the books that she published, all point towards Jesus, Desire of Ages, The Great Controversy, all that. The compilations point to Jesus, but they just pick out certain parts of the books and for like topical research. They still point to Jesus because they are written by Ellen White, but it's just a compilation of what she said, not in order. But the compilations should, if it's from the White estate, the compilations will give you the reference where they got that from, so you can go and you can read the entire section of where they got that from. But Ellen White, first vision, twofold: keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, and two, don't deny the midnight cry. Don't deny William Miller's message. The Adventists are a prophetic movement, right? Uriah Smith, editor of the Review and Herald, will publish this doctrines for the critics to review, right? Why would he publish this doctrine? Why would he publish the spirit of prophecy doctrine for the critics to review? People believed at this time, right, when we were just starting to get our wits about us, when we were just starting to get off the ground running, and we accepted Ellen White as a prophetess, some believed that we took Ellen White and put her in the closet, and when she came out, what she spoke of, that's what we made our doctrine. And that's just crazy. But there are people out there who believe it, right? Remember, my next point here, not every original member of our founding fathers believed Ellen White was a prophet at first. Bates wasn't convinced, right? But it wasn't until she had a vision about astronomy that he would be a believer. Now, why is this? Ellen White, there's no record of her studying astronomy, right? The study of the stars. Bates was a captain of a boat, right? He knew certain things that how to navigate and triangulate and all that navigation stuff by stars, through astronomy. When Ellen White was able to give him this vision, he believed it to be the only way she could have received it is through God. So that convinced Bates, right? The Sabbath, our fourth S doctrine. Rachel Oakes, 1840, a Seventh Day Baptist, had warned her pastor about keeping all of the commandments, right? They were a Sunday keeping church. She warned them about keeping the Sabbath the seventh day, right? In 1844, T.M. Preble also accepts the Sabbath truth. 1845, Bates accepts it. 1846, he shares it with James and Ellen White. They reject the Sabbath at first, right? It wasn't until Bates connected the Sabbath to Revelations 11, 15 to 19, the sanctuary, to Revelation 14, verse 12, which is a connection to the third angel's message, and Revelation 12, verse 17, which is the dragon and the war with the saints. After he connected all these and then represented it to the whites, they finally clicked and they said, seventh day Sabbath, Saturday, seventh day of the week. We believe, let's preach it. And then the state of the dead. Now, this is a big one still within our church today, right? George Storch in 1840, he states humanity does not have immortality. Charles Fitch, remember him, the Millerite preacher, right? He was the first convert of this doctrine. Bates and the whites would later accept it, right? Now remember, all of our founding fathers and mothers, they were part of big churches who put belief on Sunday services and other doctrines that that church had, right? So some of you might be like, why did it take them so long to accept this, right? But remember, we're a Bible-believing church, so we had to study everything out and make it make sense through the scriptures before we would just accept it, right? Some of us nowadays, we just hear something, we're like, oh, yeah, yep, okay. We don't write it down, we don't study it out. And that's wrong. You don't just accept something off of hearsay. That's why I give this PowerPoint. You can reference it and with some of the verses, and we'll go in later some of the stuff. But don't believe just what I say. We have to study it out, right? And then they tie it all together. But what would be the point of Christ's second coming? That if we die and we go to heaven or hell, then why would Jesus need to come again? And that is what makes it make sense when they tie everything together through the sanctuary, through Revelation, right? And through Ecclesiastes, the dead know nothing, right? If we die and we go directly to heaven or cast into hell, why does Jesus need to come again? If we automatically right away go there. Didn't make sense. And then our motto for the church, the three angels' message. I have it broken down very simply. The first angel, hear God and give glory, for the hour has come. Angel number 2, Babylon is fallen. And the third angel, here are those who keep the commandments of God. Now, some of you out there are like, you left out a whole bunch. I did not put the entire three angels' message on there, Revelation 14, 6 to 12. I did not. I broke it down so it's a little bit more relatable. But Revelation 14, 6 to 12, we should have memorized because that is our motto for the church. I just simply broke it down where you could share it with someone who is not Seventh Day Adventist and why we believe the three angels' message, right? We hear God and we give glory, for the hour has come. Babylon is fallen, and here are those who keep the commandments of God. Ties our message all together. Now, we went over the 5 fundamental pillars, the 5 S's, right? And if we stay rooted in these 5 S's, then that's how we get the other 23 doctrines that we now have as the 28 fundamental beliefs. But if we was to take one of these doctrines out, any of the original 5, our church would collapse. Because that's what we've been built on. That's what we can prove through the Bible, through scriptures. Now, we can prove all other 23, but these original 5 is our strongest and the ones that we won't budge on, right? And in 1980s, our pillars were starting to be shaken. Our original 5 were starting to be shaken. And I will go into that into a later detail. But I say that hoping that you'll go research out what happened. So when I give my presentation on it, you'll already have some idea and you'll see why the 5 S's, right? The sanctuary, the Sabbath, the second coming, state of the dead, and spirit of prophecy, why those 5 are so key to our foundational roots. So we take those 5 pillars, mix it with the 3 Andrews message. Now we have what we're going to preach on. So what do we do now? 1843 to 1863, we start our organization process. The shut door theory. I'm going to go into more into this later in its own presentation. But it was based off of the parable of the 10 virgins, right? The parable, right? It says the bridegroom shut the door on the unfoolish and did not let them in because he did not know them. We believed, right, that in 1844 Christ entered the holy place and the door was shut, right? That's what we believe. That's how we get the shut door theory. No one else could come into the truth. Whoever had accepted the truth up until October 22nd, 1844, whoever accepted that truth was the only ones who could enter into the kingdom of heaven. We would later kick the door wide open, but that's a topic for another time. Shut door theory. Keep that in mind because it plays a pivotal role in our church, right? Now remember, our founding fathers, they didn't like organization, right? Some of you might be like, you may find that hard to believe now. But they didn't like organization. Why is that? Well, remember, they were kicked out of organized church. So why would they want to organize? Why would they want organization when they were kicked out of organizations, right? So the first step that we took was what we call now Sabbath conferences, right? And check this out. Some people have a hard time making the Sabbath on time one day of the week, right? But the Sabbath conferences, they would meet from Thursday until Monday, right? Thursday to Monday. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's 5 days together. 5 days. And they would preach on our 5 doctrines. They would show those who were in attendance. I see Palmer, Bates, Edson, and the Whites. They now knew what they wanted to preach, right? Not only preach, but they wanted to teach at these conferences. As they were teaching, we can see the shut door theory now starting to be like, well, is the door really shut? Or these people who are starting to believe and accept the message, are they going to be welcomed in? In 1848, the first Sabbath conference in Belden House, Rocky Hill, Connecticut, had 15 to 50 people in attendance over the span, right? The second was at Volney, New York. They had 35 in attendance. And the third was in Port Gibson, New York. Now, there's no number given. I've researched it. Some say, hearsay, that there was anywhere between 1 to 75, but there's no concrete evidence in any of the books that I have read that tells me the exact number of the third one. But these are the first 3 that were preached, and we just took off from there, right? The second step was publication, right? We needed to get the word out. We need to write. We need to print, right? In 1848, Ellen White has a vision which says James White should stop mowing hay and working, and he needed to start writing. James's paper would be called Rays of Light because it would go around the world. But Bates wanted James to preach. He didn't want him to write. James was a more powerful speaker than he was of a writer, right? And in 1849, an eight-page paper called Present Truth was printed, 1,000 copies. Present Truth, keep that in your mind too, because this is what James believed we should be preaching throughout the years. As truth comes up, as present truth is found, we need to teach and preach that. But back to topic. 1,000 copies were printed, right? In 1850, they started a second journal called the Adventist Review. By 1850, the journals combined into what we know as the Adventist Review. So they took Present Truth and the Adventist Review, and they just made the Adventist Review. In 1852, the third journal started, Youth Instructor. This is the first way to reach young people. Now, young people, remember, the average age of what would be known as a Seventh-day Adventist was in their mid-20s, early 30s. Now, the average member's age is between 53 to 60. You see the difference here? So when they're talking about youth instructor, and this first way to reach young people, they were talking about people younger in their early 20s. Now we're trying to get people back into the fold at their late 20s, early 30s. So you can see how our message isn't reaching the young children, right? So that's something that the church has recognized, and we are taking the round turn on, right? But I'll be for a later topic. Sticking to the PowerPoint, right? In 1853, John Byington, who was the first Sabbath school teacher at Bucksbridge, New York, he became the first General Conference president. Now, he didn't become it in 1853, but he was the first Sabbath school teacher, right? In 1853, right? I hope that doesn't confuse people. So John Byington became our first General Conference president when we had the election, right? In the late 1850s, right, we now had a printing press and publishing house in Battle Creek, Michigan. The third step to organization was issuing IDs, right? We had to issue IDs because we had no way to certify ministers. We didn't know who, we didn't want anyone just preaching the message if they didn't have the foundational roots in the 5 S's, the 5 pillars that we have, right? We had no way to distribute funds. We couldn't buy anything, couldn't hold property. This is James White. He urged for organization in 1853. He would state that trying to avoid becoming Babylon, they hadn't become Babylon. By trying to avoid organization because they feared it to be Babylon, they were becoming Babylon because they had no way to buy or any way to keep track of nothing, right? Which brings us to Sister Betsy, right? Preachers were leaving the church because we had no way of paying them. We wasn't organized. We couldn't get funds. We couldn't do all that. So we had no way to pay our preachers, right? Laffenborough and Andrews would leave the ministry in 1856. In the late 50s, Ellen White had a vision to go after them, to bring them back to the church. In 1856, Battle Creek Church needs to distribute funds. It needs to find ways to pay ministers to help people from leaving. If you preach the gospel message and you make that your sole work, they believe you should be getting paid for it. Because being a pastor, being a preacher is a full-time job. You can't have, just like today, right? Many pastors do it and they let their mission, they let the church slide. And you can tell many pastors today, because they don't get paid a lot, right? They'll have a second job. That second job will eat up their time that they're supposed to be with the church. So you can see how we are kind of going backwards, but we were making correct steps back in the original day, right? So they needed to find ways to pay ministers to help prevent them from leaving. So they came up with the idea of Sister Betsy. You might ask, what is Sister Betsy? Well, every man would pay 5 to 25 cents per week, right? Ladies would pay 1 to 5 cents per week, right? Now, 1 to 5 cents per week you would pay if you owned property worth over $100. Because you have property over $100, you were considered wealthy, so you could afford the 1 to 5 cents per week on top of the 5 to 25 cents, right? Now, they came up with this idea, and this made James White happy and excited because now they could afford to finally send people out on evangelistic and missionary missions. 1859, James White publishes an article calling out the brethren who were still refusing to be an organized church. In 1860, we finally adopt the name Seventh Day Adventist. So from 1844 until 1860, we had no identity, so to speak. In 1860, we changed all that and we adopted the name the Seventh Day Adventist. We were starting to come into our organizational roots. In 1861, we can now hold property through the Printing Association. 1862, we formed a lot of conferences. 1863, General Conference is formed. Now, James White was voted in as the president, but he denied it because he said it would be too contradicting if he pushed for organization. He pushed for this whole thing to come together. He pushed for the name. He pushed for how to collect funds, how to pay people. He felt the contradiction if he was to become the first president. So he denied it. And John Byington, remember him, who was the first Sabbath school teacher, right? He was voted in. So John Byington was our General Conference president. We had on the books at the time 3,500 members. We finally became an organized church. 3,500 members. Remember when the Millerite movement, the Great Disappointment, we had what, between 50,000 to 100,000. Now we're at 3,500. Now we're in the millions today. This is where I have stopped the PowerPoint, 1863. Now, you might ask yourself, why did I stop there? Why didn't I go in further? Because I wanted people to see exactly when we became an official church. Many people think that at 1844 and on, we were just known as Seventh Day Adventist, and we weren't. It took a lot of work and effort to get the church to where it's at up to this point. Now, our next topic, I'm going to go a little bit into Ellen White and why we believe her as a prophet. You might say, well, why don't we continue on with the church history? 1863 sets into motion as us being an organized church. A key member of our church is Ellen White, right? She's one of the most known Seventh-day Adventists. Her books have been published and translated in over hundreds of languages. So I feel it's only fitting that we talk about Ellen White next, so people can understand who Ellen White is, what she contributed, but more importantly, does she meet the criteria to be a prophet that we claim her to be? So tune in next time. I will do the same. I'll record. I will try to get some people in, but tune in next time because that's the study we're going to do next. Ellen White has been at the center of controversy in our church since she had her first vision. So we're going to put the silence, the critics, I guess you could say, of why we accept her as a modern day prophet. So tune in next time. Thank you for joining, and thank you for tuning in. And I hope you have enjoyed the video. Thank you and have a blessed day.